Hey guys, this is John from US Dash Camera. Today I got a review on the Blueskysea B4K Ultra HD dash camera. Now this was sent to me for review by Blueskysea, so I'd like to thank them for sending this review unit out. Also I'd like to thank them for being very patient because I've had this unit for quite a while and I have really been dragging my feet on getting work done on my channel the last few months, so really appreciate it. This review is going to be a little unique because this camera comes with just the main unit, and then you can also add on a second rear camera, and some of the accessories are not included, so I'm going to talk about what's included in the main package and what's not. What's interesting about this camera is it is true 4K. It has a Sony 8 megapixel image sensor. A lot of cheaper brands will often say the camera's 4K and the video file will actually be 4K resolution, but they often only have a 4 megapixel image sensor, which actually isn't enough to have true 4K video. So this one is a true 4K dash camera, and currently on Amazon with some sales and coupons it's only $100, so that's a pretty great price. And this camera has a couple advanced features that I don't think any other camera at this price has. It does include a Wi-Fi app, which a lot of cheaper cameras have that, but what this does have that most others don't have is a buffered parking mode. So I'll talk about the parking mode a little bit later, but taking a look at the camera, you can see the memory card slot is right here on the left side if you're looking at the back. We got a little power button there. It does support up to 256 gigabytes, which is pretty awesome. And the 4K is in H.265 encoding, so they shouldn't be super huge files. On the side we got the menu button up and down. The menu is pretty simple. You can just hit the menu button a couple times to pause it and open the menu, and then when you're scrolling through the menu it's very straightforward, very easy to use. Shouldn't be trouble for anyone. Down on the bottom we have a reset button. Then here on the top you can see the optional rear camera. Then we have the power cable, which is micro USB, and this is where the mount is going to mount to, and that is also where you're going to get the GPS signal. The GPS is part of this mount. Overall I like the design of this camera. It's pretty lightweight. It does feel a little cheap, but not bad quality. So one thing that you can get optionally is a CPL filter, and it does come with a protective case, which is nice. You can see on the top there's a little white dot, so you're going to want that to point up. And if you aren't aware what these do, they reduce glare in the image, so you can get a much clearer, crisper image when driving around because your windshield will reflect quite a lot. This is $15.99 I believe on Amazon, so if you get all the accessories it starts to add up. Now in the box it's just going to include a standard 12 volt power cable. It does at least have a USB charging port in case you want to charge your phone and you only have one 12 volt socket. As I said before, it is mini or micro USB. If you get the rear camera, it is going to include this cable that actually has a detachable section for the actual rear camera. It looks like a headphone jack. Plugs into the top, as I said. So once you wire this to the back, you will have this rear camera, and that will plug in to that end of the cable. Now this is a Sony image sensor version. Currently on Amazon I'm only seeing the original version, which wasn't an image sensor from Sony, and this one definitely has its pros and cons. I did take samples from both cameras. Now right now I just have this one in front of me, but we'll talk about the rear footage a little bit later. As I said before, there is a parking mode, and for the parking mode you are going to need the optional hardwiring kit, and this is a 3-wire kit, so you're going to have to connect this to a ground. The red cable is going to go to a battery connection, and then the yellow cable is going to go to an ACC connection, or They should go to fuses actually, and Blueskysea, it does offer a hardwiring kit, which is pretty nice. It includes several of these ATA circuits, and you can see these plugs easily go into here, so you can disconnect or reconnect them if you want to, and you don't have to splice wires or be an expert on splicing cables together or anything like that. Now, I'm not going to get into detail with installing because that's a whole process that could add quite a bit of time to this video, but down in the description I will provide a link to the blackboxmycar.com hardwiring tutorial because it is very useful. So the thing about this camera is it is 4K 30 frames per second, but only if you're using just the front camera. The video quality is adequate. It doesn't seem like the best out there. It could just use some firmware tweaking to adjust the image, but I think most people would be pretty happy with it. A lot of people would prefer to have 1080p 60 with a high bit rate, and if it's a good image sensor, or 1440p over 4K, but I think a lot of people will be happy with this. I would say just take a look at the samples and compare to other popular cameras and see if it is good enough for you. Now, the weird thing is if you connect the rear camera, the 4K is only going to be 20 frames per second. I think that's going to be a draw for a lot of people. Like, some people are just not going to accept 20 frames per second. You might not be able to really tell in this footage. And by the way, this video is likely just going to be uploaded in 1080p, so you're not going to get the full quality of the 4K. And generally, YouTube compresses the video anyways, so it's never as good as the raw footage. But I think some people are really going to prefer using this camera in 1440p 30 frames per second, and then with the rear camera on 1080p 30 frames per second. Now for the rear camera, I thought the video quality was okay with the original model. So this is the non-Sony version. It didn't look that detailed during the day, and during the night it was very poor, I thought, actually. I was going to ask the Blueskysea representative about the rear camera, and that's when they actually reached out and said they have a Sony rear camera that's going to be optional. So they asked if I wanted to wait to receive that one, and I did, which this is the Sony version. So again, the original rear camera, the night quality was just so poor, I don't think anyone would be very happy with it. Now once I got the Sony camera, I thought the day quality was noticeably better. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see the difference in this YouTube upload, but I thought it was noticeable that it was an increase in quality during the day. The problem with this new Sony rear camera though was at night the default setting was way too dark. It was quite possibly the darkest rear camera I've ever seen. Now I understand that the rear camera, when it's facing out the back of your car, there isn't always light behind you to shine up the road, but usually decent cameras will still be able to pick up some low light conditions pretty well. But this one, it was almost like pitch black. Now you can adjust the exposure level, bumped it up 2/3 of a level, and it did seem to help a little bit. It's hard to compare directly because in some of my samples there's headlights from other cars and sometimes there's not, but it is still pretty grainy. So overall, the problem with the rear camera, I believe, is just the bit rate is far too low. So you can keep bumping up that exposure level to get that good brightness in the rear camera at night, but just remember you are going to have to deal with a brighter picture during the day too, so you don't want it to be overexposed during the day. So it'll take some fiddling around, which is why that's sort of a disappointment. I prefer when cameras have a really good exposure level right out of the box. Now, the parking mode on this camera, as I said, is a buffered parking mode. So there are some limitations to this though. If you're using it as a single channel front camera only, then it's not really going to be a big deal. But if you are using the rear camera, that's where it's limited. The buffered parking mode is only during the impact detection. So when it senses an impact, it's going to start recording 10 seconds prior to the impact and then continue recording for 20 seconds after. The problem with this feature is there is a limited memory space, so there's no buffered parking mode that can record to the rear camera. So you're only going to get that front camera even when you have the rear camera connected for that buffered impact detection. So if you want to be able to record during parking mode to both front and rear camera, you're going to have to use the motion detection, but the motion detection is not buffered, again, due to that limited memory space. The reason is because the buffered portion of the video is not saving to your phone, it's saving into its own internal flash, faster, like RAM type memory, and then when it senses that impact, it saves it to the memory card. So you're not constantly recording to your memory card for that buffered feature. So if you're going to have the front and rear camera and you are using that impact detection, you might want to back into parking spots. Or if you are okay with not having buffered parking mode, then the motion detection seems to work okay, but I did notice that there is a delay in when it starts recording. It starts recording a couple seconds after it detects motion. But the fact that this camera is so cheap and has Wi-Fi, true 4K, and a buffered impact detection mode, at least for the front camera, is still really awesome. So that's why I keep thinking this camera is pretty great if you want just the front camera. Overall, guys, I like this camera. It has a lot of pros, but some of those cons are quite big cons. Of course, one being what we just talked about, the parking mode buffered feature only working for the front camera, but also that rear camera, even with that Sony image sensor, is, it's going to take some tweaking to get a good exposure level at night and balance that with the daytime footage. Now, I'm not sure how much the Sony camera is going to be. At the time of recording, the standard camera was only $25, which is really cheap, but the video quality was just so poor at night. No changing the exposure level, I think, was going to make that video quality good enough, in my opinion. If you just want that rear camera and you're not too concerned with that night quality, then $25 is really cheap and it gets you a rear channel for quite a great price. But I'm going to leave that choice up to you guys. So I hope this video was helpful. If you guys had any other questions about this camera, if I forgot anything, if I left anything out, comment down below and I'll try to answer any questions that I can. If you enjoyed this video or any of my other videos, I always appreciate if you hit like and subscribe. And as usual, drive safe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.